In this lesson, we are finally going to implement the login function for our app. Now that we've gone through all the work of setting up our Supabase project and connecting it with GitHub and building out our login page, now we can tie all these elements together and log in with GitHub. But first, I want to clarify something between authentication and authorization. So these are two distinct concepts, and they're both shortened to auth, which makes things a little confusing at times. But the difference is this: authentication is about identity, it's about proving who you are, whereas authorization is about restricting access based on that identity. So in this chapter, we're going to be focused on the authentication part of the puzzle, where we will use GitHub to help identify who our users are. Later on in the course, once we've implemented the checkout process, we can then use authorization to determine if that user is allowed to access the course or not. One thing that we need to update before we can get into this is a permission in our GitHub OAuth app. So if you go back to your developer settings, then select your Mastering Nuxt 3 OAuth app, which we just created, we'll need to come into the account permissions here, down to email addresses, and then set the access level to read only. Once we do this, then we'll be able to use this app properly with our application. So let's implement the login method now. Now I'm just going to copy and paste this guy in. We missed an end bracket there, so I'll put that there. And at the top, we're going to grab our Supabase client using the use Supabase client composable. And from there, we can access all of our auth methods. The one we're going to use is the sign in with OAuth method. And we're going to give it the provider of GitHub. Now, if you remember in our Supabase project, we had that whole long list of OAuth providers that we could enable. And we can provide any one of them in here. Now, you might want to eventually add on additional OAuth providers, in which case you could switch between them in this case. Then we add in a bit of error handling, and that's it. We don't really need to do a lot in order to log in using Supabase, which is one of the reasons why I love it so much. I could have chosen Firebase, which is another popular alternative. If we were to use Firebase with this instead, the process is actually very similar, but we might have to do a little bit more work in order to build ourselves some composables and get things to work in a nice manner. But with the Supabase Nuxt module, we get a lot of this stuff done for us, and so it's very simple and straightforward. So now we actually need to hook up this login button to the login method, and we're good to go. Now, if we hit login with GitHub, we'll see that we are redirected back to our home page. What happens in the background with OAuth is that our application redirects to GitHub, and then GitHub can determine who we are, and then redirects back to our application with a token, and that token contains information about the user. But if we go into our app, we see we're not doing anything with that information yet. So our next step is to add in a user card that we can display right in this top corner here. So let's add that in right now. This component will grab the current user using the use Supabase user composable. Then with some computed methods, we extract the name and the profile from that user object that GitHub gives back to us. And then if the user exists, we'll display the card showing the profile picture, their name, and then giving a logout button as well. Now, a side note about this component and the way that it's designed, we could have built it with props so that we have to pass in this user object, but then the component isn't self-contained. And it's actually really nice if a component like this is completely self-contained, because no props are actually a lot easier than one prop or even two props. And so by making it self-contained, we make it a lot more reusable and easier to put into different parts of our application if we ever wanted to do that. So I save that, and we'll add it into our course page here. And we'll see that it's actually pretty straightforward because we don't need to grab that user object. At the same time, I need to update how this div is styled in order to get the layout to work correctly for us. But as you can see now, we have our user card displayed in the top right here. Displays my name, profile, and then a logout button that currently does nothing. One important thing to note is how we actually do the login process, how it keeps track. And so if we open up our dev tools and go into the application tab, we can see that there is this SB auth token here. And this is for Supabase. And this token is the access token for us. If you want to look into this further, you can learn more about JWT or JSON Web Tokens and how they work. But we can see that this access token has some extra information along with when it will expire and when we'll need to get a new token, as well as how to get that token. But you can see that we also have this user object on it, and this is the GitHub user. And so we can see we have all of this extra metadata, email confirmed at. And so this is all the information that we're getting back from GitHub. In this lesson, we've shown how we can log in to our application using GitHub, but we also need to do the opposite action. We need to be able to log out as well. And that's exactly what we'll cover in the next lesson.